pretty much everybody thinks they have good taste in music, right? I always used to say everybody thinks they have good taste in music and are good drivers, you know? What I do is to support the storytelling. And so the music in the film isn't something that's adjacent to the story. It's ideally elemental to the story.
I'm Justin Jay, and this is The Plug. In the 2001 film The Royal Tenenbaums, Luke Wilson's character Richie has an emotional breakdown in a bathroom, attempting to take his own life while Elliott Smith's Needle in the Hay plays in the background. The somber tone of the song, juxtaposed with Richie's unraveling, creates an eerie and indelible moment in the film. It's a brilliant example of how music can intensify a scene and add layers of meaning to a character's struggle. While the role of film director is widely understood, the equally crucial responsibility of overseeing the music and score in a film often goes unnoticed. So who exactly is behind this essential element of storytelling? Today's guest is an accomplished music supervisor who's worked closely with legendary directors like Wes Anderson, Richard Linklater, Martin Scorsese, and countless others. He's helped craft some of Hollywood's most iconic soundtracks, including Rushmore, The Wolf of Wall Street, Boyhood, and over 100 other feature films. His knack for utilizing timeless classics and for finding the perfect deep cut to enhance storytelling has made him one of the most celebrated and sought-after supervisors in film and television. So why does he believe that the Beatles are like kryptonite for a movie's music? And what does it take to actually license Led Zeppelin for a soundtrack? We'll find out as we sit down for a conversation with the visionary supervisor responsible for curating some of the most unforgettable music moments of the last 3 decades. Today, supervisor, Grammy Award winner, and passionate aficionado of music, Mr. Randall Poster. Randall Poster, thank you for sitting down. You're a busy guy, and I really appreciate you taking time to sit down. I've been wanting to chat with you for quite some time.
Oh, thank you, Justin.
So let's start at the beginning. What was your relationship with music growing up? Were you always a huge music fan? I mean, is being a music supervisor kind of a culmination of a dream, or how did you even know what a music supervisor was?
I really didn't. You know, I was always mad for music and crazy about movies, you know, and growing up in New York City and, you know, in sort of a golden era of both music and cinema, you know, and just really attuned to what was happening, both AM and FM. And as far as the movies went, just, you know, me and my cronies as young kids would, you know, go to 4 or 5 movies over a weekend, you know, so just really had a deep appreciation and found great joy and solace in watching and listening.
So the language of movies and music were almost equally as important to you?
I think so, yeah. I mean, you know, music was more daily accessible, but I was pretty well captured by movies. And grew up in just sort of a wonderful era of filmmaking, sort of that great 1970s renegade period of filmmaking.
Well, so I'm sure one of the first questions that people ask you anytime they sit down to interview you is, what exactly does a music supervisor do? And I want to get to that, but in a little bit more of an oblique way. So as a professional photographer, I'm a little bit irritated sometimes or frustrated that everybody seems to basically have a high definition camera in their pocket at all times.
Right.
And they may or may not have a creative vision, or they may or may not have experience directing subjects or dealing with clients.
Mm-hmm.
But on a technical level, essentially anybody can take kind of a good photo every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
And, in an era where digital music is so vast and expansive and accessible, I'm wondering, are there any parallels with what you do? Like, in other words, if somebody was to say, oh, dude, I make awesome playlists on Spotify, I could totally be a music supervisor.
Yeah.
Like, what wouldn't they be understanding about what you do and how well you do it?
Well, I mean, I think it even predates the digital era, is that pretty much everybody thinks they have good taste in music, right? I always used to say everybody thinks they have good taste in music and are good drivers, So, and obviously, having access to almost the complete world of recorded music at your fingertips, it certainly makes it easier to access than during the days when, you'd have an idea for a song and make the plan to like be at Tower Records when it opened and hoping that they had the CD or the album. But I think the difference is that, what I do is to support the storytelling, right? And so the music in the film isn't something that's adjacent to the story. It's ideally elemental to the story and supporting the story. So, I think that when people ask me what I do, the broader, or what it says on my passport, is that, I'm a filmmaker. And that's really, why I think I've had these really beautiful ongoing relationships with certain directors. I think because I think we align as storytellers, and using the music to support and supplement the storytelling.
Well, can you break down, just on a technical level, or like on a kind of nuts and bolts level, like break down the relationship between the music supervisor, the composer, the score, and the needle drops? How do they all fit together?
Well, it's generally somewhat different on every movie. Hopefully they're working in tandem. Oftentimes there's a part in the process where you do something called spotting, right? Where you go through the movie and say, okay, there should be music here. There should be a song here. This is a score moment. This moment, let's try both a song and a piece of score to see what works best. Sometimes you're in a situation where I'll say to a composer, I need this spot to help establish our song vocabulary or help to establish the song motif. And on the other hand, sometimes I'll say, I really think you should take this spot. Or the composer will say, can I have this spot because I need to establish a certain score theme or motif. So, sort of that's how it works in the ideal situation, right? And then there are movies that I'm more involved with helping to direct the composer or have more of a voice in trying to define what the score should sound like or what the score should be doing. And then there are other situations where, a director has a well-established line of communication with a composer and they don't need an extra voice, And so, that's kind of how how kind of the division of labor gets established.
Well, I read a really interesting quote when I was doing some research. Somebody said, let me know what you think of this. It said, Randall has an amazing understanding of the entire sonic language that holds a movie together. Do you agree with that? It's a very flattering way to put it, but would you agree with that?
I certainly try to. I try to have that overview, because oftentimes if you're working, you're working on a scene or you're working on a sequence or you're working on a reel of a movie. And then sometimes you just have to be able to like rise above and kind of get a fuller sense of like the geography of the musical component. And sometimes obviously, or it's not, maybe not so obviously, it's helping to decide where there should be no music, right?
Which is sometimes an important choice too, right?
Yeah, it is, or where, oftentimes in the process, I mean, it's a very arduous process to make a movie, especially for a director. And there are points in the movie, there are points in the process where it just doesn't seem like it's coming together, or, the wine is still in a sort of dumb stage, right? And a music supervisor or the team of people working on the movie at a point has to encourage the director to say, like, trust your movie. You don't need to lean on something. You don't need this musical component to support the story. Give the audience a chance to sort of take a breath.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the audience, because it seems like filmmaking is such a collaborative process, from, the director to the editor to the music supervisor. And, I think that if most of those people do their job correctly, to the average audience, those creative decisions become almost invisible.
Yeah.
I mean, especially people outside of the industry. I don't think there's a lot of audiences that sit there and go, oh, that's a beautiful shot, or the way that timeline unfolded was so clever, And
right,
so,
right.
But that said, I have to tell you a little story. I remember really vividly watching Rushmore, a Wes Anderson film, for the first time. Mm-hmm. And there's a scene where Jason Schwartzman's character comes down out of an elevator, and it's shot in slow motion. And he takes a piece of gum and he sticks it on the wall and keeps on moving with such swagger. And it was to A Quick One While He's Away by The Who.
Right.
And that scene made me smile and just affected me in such a profound way that I vividly remembered, like, looking at the credits to see, like, who did this and what song is this, And I'm telling you this story as an utmost compliment, but I'm wondering,
right.
do you take it that way, or do you almost see that as a shortcoming? Would you prefer the music to serve the film and kind of go unnoticed in the background?
I mean, I think that's one. I think this, I think the music in Wes's movies, particularly, and certainly in Rushmore, is that it was such a strong flavor in the storytelling, and again, that wasn't a standalone, right? There was a really finely tuned song design in that film. So I think that for me, in that particular moment, it doesn't. I take it as a compliment, because it's such a great and exciting moment in the film, and it's such a great kind of piece of musical discovery,
Yeah.
And it's so much fun, the way that sequence plays out. But to your point, I think sometimes the best job that I do, it's invisible, right? It's like, sometimes I'll get a call from like, oh, I saw that movie, the music was the best part. And I'm like, that's not really a victory, really, And so, you pick an example, and there are other examples, say with Scorsese, I think has done it that well, where it's just it's so much of the director's voice, or it's so much part of the story momentum. It's unavoidable to have a kinetic response to it, but it doesn't take you out of the movie, I think there are situations where songs can take you out of the movie, or sometimes if people get too focused on the music, they're missing out on the broader storytelling.
Well, I mean, do you find, because you mentioned Scorsese, there's certain directors that are so well known for being incredibly involved in the needle drops in the music for their films, whether it's Scorsese, Wes Anderson, Cameron Crowe, Quentin Tarantino. Have you worked with Quentin at all? Well, just as an example, though, I mean, I'm wondering, are there vast differences in how your involvement plays out depending on the director? In other words, are there certain movies where you're almost given a finished product and asked to put music, versus some scripts that literally have music written onto the page? I mean, is it very specific to each director what your role is?
Yeah, and oftentimes even the same director can have a different process with a different movie. I mean, I've done a lot of period pieces, right? And so there's a lot of research that goes into it, particularly movies that I've worked on that are, say, in the 20s and 30s, where I become kind of I'm basically like the encyclopedia. I try to become the Encyclopedia Britannica, and get a sense of, what the musical landscape might have been in a certain era, and becoming grounded in it. And so I think in those types of films, there's a period of time where you're trying to get everybody in the creative circle kind of up to speed into what was happening and what the different sounds were. And, things like whether it's something's happening, before there was radio or before there was mass awareness of particular artists, where there was regional music and things like that. And then sometimes, directors come in with a strong idea about what they think the music should be. And oftentimes when you bring the movie home, it's not as suitable as one had imagined.
Well, how would you characterize the differences between working, let's say, with Scorsese versus Wes Anderson? Like, is it a similar approach, or are they completely different in terms of your relationship to the music and the film?
The two of them share great qualities as directors in terms of their kind of obsessive focus and their hard work and their deliberate process. Distinctly individual people. And also is just in terms of, Wes and I grew up together.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, we grew up together just in terms of the fact that we've been working together almost 30 years.
Got it.
Scorsese was already the icon that he was when I first got involved working with him. And with Scorsese, there's always been a lot of on-camera music in the films that I've been involved with. And again, it's allowed me to do some spectacular time traveling.
Well, I want to talk about the economics of music supervision for a second. Mm-hmm. Have you found that with your success and with your track record, along with that becomes great budgets and in a way makes your job a little bit easier? Like, in other words, like hypothetically, if you thought that the absolute perfect song for a particular scene was the Beatles or Michael Jackson or Led Zeppelin, would you generally be able to find the money for that? Or are licensing fees and clearances always playing a role in your creative decisions?
It certainly doesn't generally alter my creative advocacy. It's always a challenge to pay for the music in a movie because, generally it's the last money that goes out. Everything is generally costs more than they anticipated. In the last 20 years, visual effects has really become, visual effects has just been an explosive budgetary item, right? They always want to do more with visual effects. And so it's always a struggle, whether it's $1 million movie or it's a $100 million movie. It's always...
Well, what percentage of music supervision is dealing with legal and negotiation and clearances versus strict creative decisions?
They go hand in hand. Certainly I try to have in my mind, the creative is the dominant activity, and then having to deal with the logistics and the financial and the sometimes even just figuring out who owns something or convincing somebody that they do own something. And there's a lot of detective work that often happens, but I try to find some pleasure in that. But it's challenging, it's challenging always. And, I would say in terms of the benefit of having worked on so many movies and working on so many movies, big and small, is that, I'm a good customer, but I'm also a passionate customer as far as, licensing from the publishers or the record companies.
Yeah. Well, because it seems like a catalog is essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like a catalog is essentially, it's an asset ultimately, and the owner of that asset is going to want to get a return at some point. Mm-hmm. And have you found situations where you were extremely surprised at the pricing of a particular catalog, either incredibly high or even low? Like, does the popularity of a song generally go with the price, or is it all over the place?
There's been, since I've been doing this, there's been a lot of consolidation among ownership, right? That whatever 8 major labels became 3 major labels, all of the consolidation in the major catalogs, the publishing catalogs. I think that there are songs that have been licensed for movies for decades and decades. And so there's a precedent that they don't want to abandon. So You
Does that
know,
make a song less valuable in a way though, because it's been used so many times? It's not like an exclusive, quote unquote, or I
yeah,
mean, is that a
sometimes I'm
factor?
thinking more like, the American songbook, really, but in my mind, yes. I mean, I think if certain songs have been, or it's just, and that this is more instinctive than definitive, that certain songs are just played out in movies.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I wanted to ask your question because it seems like you're right. There are a certain set of songs that seem like they're used for specific purposes over and over, and it's become like a cliche. Like for instance, like how many drug overdose scenes have you seen with "Gimme Shelter"? Or there's a period piece and there's a Vietnam sequence, and they use "Fortunate Son," for instance.
Mhm.
Like what makes you cringe? What when you watch a movie that someone else did the music for? Is it something that's just too on the nose and obvious? Is it a song
Well, I
that's
mean,
trying to be too clever and it's obtrusive? Like what
I mean,
really
I would say,
don't you like to see?
I would say, I mean, you, a lot of times you get directors will say, well, has this been in anything else? And it's like, assume that a song has been in something else. But I always say, if you use it great, you'll own it. Right. On the other hand, I think what is difficult is that, let's use Gimme Shelter. You put Gimme Shelter in a movie and like the song is maintained itself because these are songs I've been listening to for 50 years that still, I don't turn them off, right? When I hear them
Yeah.
on the radio or I put a record on. But a director will look at his movie with a song like that on it and go, oh, isn't this great? And it's like, dude, your movie, you haven't earned this song.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah.
Well, what's your philosophy on the audience's relationship with a familiar song? In other words, if there's a song that everybody has an existing emotional connection to, like if you put that in a scene, it seems like you're almost kind of already on second base in terms of establishing an emotional cue. I mean, do you find that useful or do you find that intrusive? Like, what's your philosophy on that?
I mean, I don't really have very strict rules, really, because time somehow adjusts the rules. I say sometimes, like you would say, well, what's a rule? Well, a rule is you never wear plaid and polka dots together. And then one day some kid walks into the room and he's wearing plaid and polka dots. You go like, it works. It looks good, right? I think that what happens, say, with music from the 70s and 80s, right, and I guess maybe the 90s too, some of those songs, is that people have so many different associations with the song that you can't necessarily guarantee what the response is, right? It's like you may feel differently than I do when I see it, which is again why it's really fun to work, to do something in the 20s because
A few people are
you're free. And I always say too about it's like particularly the Beatles, who at one point were impossible to license, but I've said this. I've said this in interviews. Just like, to me, like the Beatles are kryptonite, right? It's like too many associations, too overpowering, just too meaningful in different ways to people. And often too, sometimes it's like, it's funny, it's with, people have associated, like directors or editors or producers that you're working with. They have, it's like, oh, I hate that song. I hate that song. I always hated that song. And I have to sometimes say, you can put a song you hate into a movie,
Yeah.
It's okay to hate it, but it's working.
I want to get your opinion on the history of movie soundtracks, because I was doing a little research and it seems like some of the soundtracks that really defined a decade, if you look at the 60s, you have, whether it's 2001 or West Side Story or The Graduate, it's a lot of original music. Same in the 70s,
Mm-hmm.
you have huge albums, huge soundtracks like Saturday Night Fever, Grease, A Star is Born. And then you cut to the 90s and some of the biggest soundtracks that really defined that decade, whether it's Pulp Fiction or Train Spotting, Boogie Nights, Rushmore that you worked on. It's much more of a curated compilation approach to those soundtracks. And I'm wondering, is that a creative transformation, or does that have more to do with the music industry trying to figure out how to market and sell soundtracks? Like, why did that happen? I mean, was the Big Chill, was that a watershed moment in movie soundtracks?
Yeah, I mean, Big Chill, and then you also had like the John Hughes movies, I think if you look back, I mean, Grease was a adaptation of a Broadway show. West Side Story, the same thing. 2001 had, a lot of licensed music. I think things became. I mean, I don't have a pure overview. I mean, there was a period of time when soundtrack sales were so vibrant that basically the film companies were getting the record companies to finance their music budgets, right? And then as the digital reality crept in, is that there was less of a market for it because people could find those songs otherwise and put them together, and that the music, if it's not physical, the film company and the record company are not making any money, because if you buy a quick one on Apple Music or on iTunes or on Spotify, the money goes right to the original rights holder. The film company doesn't get any of the money.
Interesting.
But there's been a lot of movies that have had, the Baz Luhrmann films have had a lot of original music.
I mean, are you cynical? Because it seems like there are some soundtracks where, even the term soundtrack, does that historically reference the score of the movie, or are needle drops part of that as well? Is it semantics?
Yeah, a soundtrack is like a soundtrack album is, that's what they call it, original soundtrack album. So it's semantic. You know what? I never really got too caught up in that part of it, really. I just wanted to make sure that, I always felt if the music in the movie worked and the movie worked, everything would take care of itself, really. And again, like I did a movie years ago, Country Strong, we did all original songs, did very well selling that record. Working on the Todd Haynes movies, we did a lot of original music. So I don't know that there's anything that is absolutely definitive to say about what happened.
I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the music and the movies that you work on is you seem to have this really uncanny ability to kind of mine these gems, to find these deep cuts that people maybe aren't that familiar with. And they're used in such a evocative, just perfect way that they become classics.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, here's a perfect example, like Ooh La La by the Faces.
Right.
Had I heard that song before the Rushmore soundtrack? Maybe, maybe not, but everybody is familiar with that song now. It's become a classic, and it's been used so many times. And I guess I'm wondering, do you still have a back pocket full of these gems, or do you find it harder and harder to kind of mine music from the past that people aren't familiar with?
I've talked about that. Wes and I keep a safe of songs under lock and key, waiting for the right moment. I think that, so I certainly have songs that I've been itching to use in movies, mostly for Wes, and so. And again, it's not, people say, well, what, Randy Poster's the person who picks the songs for the Wes Anderson movies. Like, I don't pick the songs for the Wes Anderson movies. Wes Anderson picks the songs for the Wes Anderson movies. I am in dialogue with Wes Anderson. I am the person that talks to him about the music, or presents him with music, or is in conversation with him about the music. So, and again, sometimes it's a music editor, it's the editor. In the best scenario, it's the internal creative group that's making it all work. Whether it's saying, like, a picture editor says, "Hey, give me the song. Let me edit the picture a little bit to make it work, so we can get to the part you really want to get to."
I mean, but do you have a unique relationship with Wes? Would you say that that's like pretty representative of most of the directors, or is it a very different relationship you have?
Well, I mean, like I said, that's a relationship where we really grew up together making movies and have been on the front lines together on, in so many situations, and have been so, I think had so much fun creating music, whether it was, having Sao George do all the David Bowie songs, or deciding that we wanted to just use the scores that were created by and for Satyajit Ray and Darjeeling, or, so, but again, I've been really lucky in that, my contemporaries, Linklater, Todd Phillips, Wes, Karan Kusama, Sam Mendes, we have these conversations, we have dialogue that happens between the movies that is often very rewarding. But again, all those people are like, they're they're geniuses, right? They're cinematic geniuses, and I encourage people when they find genius to hold on tight.
I mean, it sounds to me almost like I think most people would think of the music for a movie as like icing on the cake, and you almost seem to think of it more as it's a character in the movie. I mean, is that a fair statement?
It's the butter in the cake, man.
Okay,
It's the
that's a good way
butter
to
in
look
the
at
cake.
that. Well, I feel like you have been, if not solely responsible, certainly a large part of so many amazing scenes, and some of them I can't imagine another song working the same way.
Right.
And like I was rewatching Life Aquatic. I mean, the scene when Bill Murray goes to fight the pirates to search and destroy, like that is such
Right.
an evocative, unique tone. I can't imagine anything else working in that context. Even with all the movies you've worked on, do you ever look back at something and be like, damn, I really crushed that. That was a unique, interesting choice, and it worked perfect, and I'm really proud of that. Like, what are some of your favorites?
Well, I mean, obviously, Wes's movies are very important to me, but I always find something. And even some of the movies that didn't turn out to be at least satisfying to me, right? To get one song in there that I really wanted to get in there. And there's a movie that I always point to that's that's lesser seen, was a movie called Jesus' Son.
Really crowd up.
Yeah, that I really love. And I really love the music in the movie, and had a wonderful time working with the editor, Jerry Peroni, who unfortunately passed. And that was a movie, though, that they had started doing. Like we both of us were brought in after they had gotten through a cut of the movie. And the music wasn't working. So, I love to watch, if you ever go see Samantha Morton dancing to Tommy Rose's Sweet Pea in that movie. I mean, that's one that I relish.
Okay, I'll have to revisit that.
Antonio Campos is a young director who I really enjoy working with. And we did a movie called Christine. And we put the song Laughing by the Guess Who in the film. And that was the first single I ever bought. And that was particularly fun. But, I always tell people, if I do have conversations about things, like, don't ask me about particular songs in movies, because I really don't always remember. But that also means that I'll catch something on television and be surprised by it,
Yeah. Well, when you're researching or looking for a song for licensing, do you have access? Is there a database of where that song has been used before, or do you kind of have to use your instincts?
I mean, you can.
How does that work?
You can find it on IMDb, and maybe I'll take a look. Generally, I look at it because if I try to find it, if I can't, I'm having a problem finding out who owned it or something, to see, like, okay, it was used. So I try to, again, part of the detective work. But that's where you can sort of sign. But I don't get too hung up on that, really. You can't. There could be a movie that's going to come out next week that has it.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, sometimes if you just say it's it's a really important musical moment that you want to really have some kind of protection, is that you'll say, hey, I need to know if you're licensing this for anything else. Or in the rarest situations, to say, what would it take to have some period of exclusivity for the use of the song?
And what's I know traditionally, Led Zeppelin was really hard to license. I guess the Beatles are expensive. I mean, what's kind of like the holy grail of, like, I can't afford that? You may not even want it, but, like, what is there anything that people just don't use because it's so expensive?
Yeah, so I think that where these legacy artists or the superstar artists have sold their catalogs to major publishers, major labels, or hedge funds, or whatever else it is, they can't be as flexible, because if they say, hey, if we paid $500 million for something and you're getting $10,000 a license, we've made the biggest mistake we've ever made in our lives.
Yeah.
So I think that ultimately will have some impact, because it's just sort of, there's a bit of dehumanization, right? It's like, you're not necessarily talking to a person who's really connected to the artist. You're talking to a person who's connected to the asset, who's charged with making the most out of that asset.
I mean, obviously, everything's gotten more corporate and consolidated over the last whatever, 20 years. But I mean, in the 70s, was that always the term? I mean, if you were going to use a Simon and Garfunkel song, would you call Paul Simon?
Yeah, I mean, it ultimately got to Paul Simon. I mean, it may still go to Paul Simon, but they're not going to. Paul Simon may say, give it to them for what they're asking, and the people at the label say, like, well, we can't give it to them for the ask. You've taken the money. I don't mean to single out Paul Simon.
Yeah.
But you've taken the money, and now we have to make that money back. And I think the other thing that happened though is that when they were selling records like crazy, they didn't even think of licensing as like a secondary income stream, right? So now, without significant record sales, they're looking to do more licensing. So, the artist is caught. Some of these artists are caught in a bit of a battle because on the one hand they want their music in movies. On the other hand, because they've taken so much money, it's hard to work things out.
Do you get hit up by young artists trying to get placement? I mean, is there obviously you don't get bribes, but I mean, I say that kind of sarcastically, but I mean, is there situations where people are kind of trying to get you to put their music into movies and offering you money or really, please, can you help us out? You're in a position of power, right?
I mean, I used to say to people say to approach me, this isn't necessarily lately, but it's like, say, if you could get this in a movie, we'll take care of it. I say, I can't even get the directors to put the good songs in the movies. I'm going to have a conflict of interest. It's completely impractical. And also it's just like, I mean, that is the one thing that I don't do anybody any favors, right? It's gotta be, the value has to be there. So,
yeah. Well, we always like to end the podcast by asking the guests to plug something that they're not directly involved with that they think isn't getting enough attention, whether it's a book, a movie, a TV show, an artist. Is there something that you want to plug? I mean, you're such a good curator of things unknown. Is there something you want to shout out and give people a little insight into?
You know what, man? I've been listening to all the old Buck Owens records. And I think that's something that people would find a lot of pleasure in. There's a new sort of like a greatest hits compendium, compilation that somebody gave me, and I've had the song "You're for Me" on repeat. And then otherwise, I love Margot Price, Shovels and Rope. A lot of the sort of the more, I guess you call them Americana, but I guess in a sense they're really, in my mind, troubadours, really.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not familiar with that. Is that something that's in your back pocket that you're waiting for the right time to use for something on screen? Or is that just a personal favorite?
Well, if it was in my back pocket, I wouldn't have mentioned it.
That would go in your safe with
that's in
with the songs you and Wes have?
Yeah. I would go to the safe that's in Zurich.
Good. Well, Randall, I've been appreciating what you do for quite some time. I'm glad we're finally able to put a face to a name. You've just been a part of just an amazing canon of American films, and I really dig what you do, and I really appreciate you taking time out. So it's been a real pleasure.
Hopefully, more to come, man.
Good luck with everything.
All right, have a good trip, man. Bye bye.
Thanks for listening, and a huge thanks to today's guest for dropping in. If you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor and take a minute to rate, review, follow, or subscribe. This episode of The Plug contains original theme music by Andrew Van Weingarten and Dan Drohan. Mixing and sound design by Matt Boynton at Ultraviolet Audio. Logo and branding by Italic at italic-studio.com. And you can check out my photography at justinj.com. Thanks again, and be sure to check out the archive and tune in for future conversations.